Hi friends, and welcome to Raft. Today we're going over the story to this ocean survival simulator. Raft is a great example of passive storytelling in video games. It's there, and you can choose when and how to interact with it. As such, there's a lot of details and moving parts that you may have missed in your own travels. So whether you're here to get a better read on what happened in the world of Raft, or just looking for a refresher before the release of Chapter 3, here's an explanation of Raft's story. Obviously, this video contains spoilers. If that's not your cup of tea, here's another Raft video that you might be interested in. But first, a quick note about Chapter 3. In Devlog 47, there was a small blurb about a story rework. Basically, the main gist of the story will stay the same, but some of the minor characters and side events were removed to make things a bit easier to understand. So not everything covered in this video will likely remain the same for Chapter 3, but that being said, let's dive into the current version story. You enter into a world completely coated in water. As far as you know, there is no land to be found. Just debris floating on top of an endless abyss, and a shark who seems rather intent on ruining your day. So, you gather what resources you find, and then you stumble into this tiny scrap of land. You can't stay long, because this island certainly doesn't contain enough food or water for you to survive on, let alone how massively boring that would be. As a scout, it is your duty to travel ahead and mark the way for anyone who comes after you. So, you dive through some resources, and you float on your way, picking up anything that crosses your path. Some of the barrels floating through the water have special blueprints in them to make an antennae and receiver. You follow the blueprint, and you're greeted by a constant beeping and a glowing blue dot on the screen. After all, any radio signal that's still transmitting means it's above water. What else can you do but guide your raft towards that glowing blue dot? And thus, you stumble across the first story location, the radio tower. Scattered throughout the radio tower, there are journal entries and radio transcripts that introduce 4 new characters: Sparrow, Wren, Cuckoo, and Owl. All of them were engineers stationed on a nuclear reactor base, receiving nicknames when their real names were leaked to the world. Wren supposedly worked for the Chinese team that maintained the reactors before the current engineers, but makes no mention of it. The reactors were considered one of the last sources of efficient energy in a sinking world, but reactor maintenance is dangerous work, leading the engineers to stall their efforts to stay safe. The journal entries found throughout the radio tower are written by Cuckoo, who suspects Wren of informing the group's shady employers of their slacking efforts. The employers come to take Wren and Sparrow, who is the most skilled engineer of the group, and the reactors with them, leaving Cuckoo and Owl behind on the reactor platform as it is set to sink. Owl and Cuckoo take a boat, intending to catch up with the employers and Sparrow and shut off the remaining reactors. However, their engine failed, leaving them stranded on the radio tower platform. Graffiti around the tower indicates that one of the remaining engineers took the radio tower's boat, leaving the other behind, as well as some struggles regarding the shark that's been bothering you as well. Climbing the tower, you find a whiteboard with more information left behind by the engineers before their disappearance. The notes on the whiteboard point towards a new utopia, and the hope of a people with a new radio code. So you plug in the new code, and off you go. Approaching the next signal, you find a massive cruise ship that was washed upon some rocks. Entering through the dark, musty underbelly of the ship, you are greeted by a variety of notes and recordings detailing the story of the people on board and their fate. The yacht belongs to Swedish politician Olof Wikström, who is supposedly partially responsible for the idea of floating cities. He abandoned his office and his people as the water rising threatened Stockholm, instead favoring to vanish with a paid crew on his personal vessel rather than completing his duty to help the city. After leaving Sweden, the crew rapidly realizes that Wikström has not provided enough resources to sustain the crew. There was not enough food nor vaccines against common diseases. Despite the yacht's pompous decor and the female escorts Wikström has brought on the journey, the crew begins to turn on each other as rising water makes resupplying impossible. The ship's captain contracts tetanus after a cut from one of the cook's knives and eventually dies from the disease due to Wikström's negligence in supplying the ship. The captain's death leaves the ship to float aimlessly, and the crew becomes even more hostile towards each other. At some point, large rats are found on board the ship. These rats are all but impossible to kill, surviving drowning, rat poison, and even gunshots. Between approaching starvation, fearsome rats, and the constant threat of disease, the yacht begins to fall into disrepair, and eventually, holes begin to appear in the side of the ship. The engine fails, leaving the ship dead in the water. Wikström and some of the crew take lifeboats, supposedly meaning to head south where there are rumors of floating cities. Among them is Hannah, one of the girls Wikström brought aboard the yacht that had grown close to both Olof and the captain. The rest of the crew is interrupted by the yacht crashing into the rocks, where you can stumble upon it all this time later. Making your way through the ship, you'll find notes detailing the crew's interactions, as well as hints of a terraforming project near Cape Town. And the crew picked up a Chinese person found floating through the ocean. That person may well be Ren from the radio tower, who confirms that there are 3 places in the south that are powered by fusion reactors, where the rest of the crew is headed after beaching on the island where you stumbled upon it. But luckily, they left behind a code for Balboa Island in the bridge for you to follow. The former mountaintop of Balboa Island hosts 3 remaining relay stations. Various engineers were scheduled to maintain the towers and ensure that communication stayed active. During the critical period of ocean rise, Bruno and Alberta, Korea were stationed on the mountain when water claimed 3 of the 6 radio towers. Alberta and Bruno received a distress call that Alberta acted upon without Bruno's consent, leaving him all alone on the island as the water continued to rise. To cope, Bruno invents children made from scraps to keep him company. Small decorations around the island detail the children's made-up adventures and the internal conflicts between them, like the couch rules and Bobby's rather intensive maze. Looking at the newspapers plastered onto the walls of the ranger station, we can get a better sense of what happened throughout the world. The headlines tell a tale of a world destroyed by climate change, where water levels rose too drastically and too rapidly for politicians to react. Other newspapers read, "We killed Africa," and "Sanctuaries in the cold," indicating that the world has reached a point of no return and that parts of the planet are already dead. Next to the ranger station, you'll find one of the radio towers. Traveling around the island, you reactivate the other 2 towers to receive the code to your next location. Sailing up to Caravan Town, you are greeted by a desert island stacked high with old RVs and rusted shipping containers. Like other story locations, the notes left behind come from 3 different perspectives: child scientist Dedo, town doctor Henrik Scholl, and purveyor Mariam. Through the notes in a series of newspapers found throughout the island, we learned that Caravan Town hosted a large floating raft town around the physical islands that you find. We learned that the people from Indonesia found a way to live on top of the world. Like the window newspapers on Balboa, some posters on top of the Caravan Town provide more details into the state of the world and the various attempts to save it. Conveniently, you find a note from Mariam, one of the leaders of the Niger Reformation Project, detailing the project's failure due to greed by the investors and the wealthy that fled to the North and South Poles. This confirms the newspapers found on Balboa and the notes from the cruise ship of Sanctuaries in the Cold. Given an ever-shrinking landmass and scarce food availability, only those with skills useful to the residents of Caravan Town were allowed to remain. Dedo, one of a few children who lived in Caravan Town, left behind his scientific journal, documenting his experiments. His father welds and his mother is smart, leaving Dedo anxious to prove his worth. His experiments are designed to assist the residents of Caravan Town by recreating an old diving suit, pumping water into the well, and even creating a prototype rocket to explore other planets if Earth is unsuitable for life. There's even a nifty reference to Elton John's Rocket Man. The remains of Dedo's experiments allow you to make your way to the infirmary, where you find the notes of Dr. Scholl and a group of feral pigs. Dr. Scholl's notes document the descent of Caravan Town from a bustling community to the abandoned desert you find in your travels. The pigs near the infirmary were a valuable asset to Caravan Town, given the rarity of meat in the oceanic world, but the pigs were contaminated with salmonella, infecting the residents faster than Dr. Scholl could provide treatment. Separating the sick was not an option given the town's close proximity, so Caravan Town had to be severed from the Raft town built around it. Supposedly, the residents of the Raft town left to find Tangaroa, the final story location currently in the game. If you explore the mayor's office, you'll find a radio code that can direct you there as well. The floating glass dome of a so-called utopia was meant to be a haven for the rushed people on a now endless ocean. Complete with restaurants, store outlets, and more, Tangaroa was meant to be a solution to the rising water. Your first introduction to the floating city is a worker reporting rafters approaching Tangaroa, likely the people coming from Caravan Town. Captain James Tully made the decision to open fire on the rafters rather than letting them in, causing a riot by the Tangaroan people. In an effort to outrun the rafters, Tully demanded that the engines run at full speed for 2 days, causing the city to be dead in the water, much like the cruise ship from earlier. Tangaroa's own food source, made up of bananas and strawberries, is plagued by beetles and food is rapidly running out, which necessitates an escape plan. Some of the engineers worked on creating a boat using the engines from the golf carts, hoping to bring the people of Tangaroa to dry land. One of the notes is written by Hannah, the girl from the cruise ship, who helped the young boy bring the engine from a golf cart to build a boat to save the Tangaroan people. The final message is from the captain, stating that he would be the last to leave Tangaroa, where you can find a code to Varuna Point. That's where the story of Raft ends. Chapter 3 is well on its way, and we know that there will be at least 2 new story locations. One of them is Varuna Point, where the Tangaroan people were headed. The other is some snowy location. This could easily be one of the poles that were meant to be a sanctuary in the cold, as the newspapers indicated. If you want to know more about everything Chapter 3 will bring, check out my video up there. And again, we know that there will be some slight changes to the story, so let me know if you want an update on Chapter 3's story as soon as information becomes available. Anyways, please leave a like if you enjoyed and consider subscribing if you haven't already. And as always, have a great day.